thankful to have you guys here for Monday Night Momentum. Again, my name is Jacob. I serve as the lead pastor. We want to thank you for being here tonight. We're here, as we said earlier, to build men up to become more like Jesus in their home, in their church, in their community, and in their workplace. This semester, we've been doing that by talking about what it means to be a leader, and we've been doing that by looking at this man in the Old Testament named Nehemiah. We're talking about how to be leaders because whether we realize it or not, everything rises and falls on leadership. Amen? Whether you lead a business, whether you lead a team, or whether you lead a family, the success of those areas depends on your ability to lead them and influence them. So we've been talking about how to become more godly leaders because when you have better leaders, you have a better world. The reality, though, is this: leadership is hard. Can I get an amen on that one? If you want to be a leader, it's not very easy. In fact, most leaders that I'm talking to today are discouraged more than they're encouraged. They're struggling with being as passionate as they used to be. And some are even thinking about hanging the hat up altogether because they struggle with staying motivated. And as we were praying about the last night of this semester, as we were processing on how we could end it in a way to encourage leaders to stay the course, stay encouraged, and finish strong, there was no one better, we thought, to speak towards this than Coach Phillip Haywood. Phillip Haywood needs no introduction, but I will share a little bit of his resume with you. He is currently in his 49th year of coaching high school football, and in that time he has become the winningest high school football coach in Kentucky state history. He has amassed 8 state championships, and he has left an immeasurable impact in the lives of many, many men in our culture, and we are honored to have him here tonight to speak with us this evening. So I'm going to invite Coach Haywood up to the stage at this time to speak to you. Afterwards, we're going to do some Q&A, and then we'll have some food together. Can we welcome Coach Haywood here with us this evening? Yes, sir. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Pastor Jacob, for the nice introduction. Thank you all for being here. Let's try this. Hey, that's minor. I brought some notes. I have an iPad that our coaches use, and they fixed it up for me, and they said, bring that. Of course, I couldn't get it turned on, so I'm going to wing this tonight. Hopefully it'll be okay. So the mic's the least of my problems. But, you know, we were driving in and just thinking about the people in Prestonsburg and what a great community this is and the wonderful relationships that we developed. And, of course, I grew up here. So I already had a pretty good feel for what Prestonsburg was like, and it was just a memorable drive in, and seeing so many of you that have played for me when I was here, maybe former students and people that I've known over the years. It was just kind of a special night to just be able to visit with you a few minutes, and I hope I have a few good things to share with you. But I just want you to know, as a coach, and some of you know this, I do a lot of things, but I think when I'm at my best is when I speak to players' hearts. And that's because I care about you, because you're special. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to do that with you a little bit tonight. Speak to your hearts, maybe coach you a little bit. And don't worry, we're not going to run around the room. I can tell by looking at some of you, you're not able to do that now. But I just want to speak to your hearts because you are special to me, and I really do care about you. If you don't mind, would you turn to the person closest to you, maybe to your right and left, and just say, you're special. And now look back and say, but I'm more special than you. Come on, let's get into this. There you go. That's it. I saw a movie a few years ago, and I don't remember the title of it, but I remember the key line, and it was about a British writer who had lost his wife, had a couple of kids, and just kind of on a whim, he bought a zoo in Australia. And they moved to Australia, they lived on the grounds, and he took a struggling zoo and made it a success. And people came to interview him, and they said, what got you into doing this? What brought this on? And he said, it's really kind of easy. It just took 20 seconds of insane courage. 20 seconds of insane courage to change a life. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk with you about tonight, about going all in for God with 20 seconds of insane courage. There was a guy who was trying to get into the gates of heaven, and he walks up, and there's St. Peter at the gates, and St. Peter said, well, what have you done that's been good in your life? And he said, well, there was an elderly lady, and she was being harassed by some punks. And I got up and went over and kicked the leader in the shins. St. Peter was impressed. He said, when did you do this? He said, about 40 seconds ago. 20 seconds of courage. I'd like for everybody to stand for a minute. We're gonna have a little audience participation, so don't get too comfortable sitting there. But the first thing I want you to do is take a step forward, just like this. You don't have to run through the chair or anything. Step back. All right, step in, step back. Step in to your faith. Step back. Step in with courage. Step back. Step in to your faith. Now look at your friend and neighbor and say, 20 seconds. Great, you can be seated. When I was at Prestonsburg Community College, PCC as it used to be called, back in the late 60s, my good friend Freddie James, who lives right next door here, and I used to go over to Archer Park when it flooded, and, the water would back up in the park. He had an 8-foot rectangular tin boat that would fit in the trunk of his car, and we'd take it over to the park. We'd go up to the upper end, back in, and we would get that boat out, and we'd paddle around in the park. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, reliving the days. Well, one day, we got a little adventurous, and we floated all the way into West Prestonsburg. And the next thing you know, we're kind of behind the houses in West Prestonsburg. And we noticed the current's picking up a little bit, but not too bad. The water's pretty backed up. We keep floating along, just kicking back, enjoying life. The next thing you know, we come around a bend, and we're 15 feet from the big sandy river and flood. We had to grab hold of the tree branches to hold on, to keep from being swept out into the river. And then these two great minds looked at each other. Now, you got to remember, the prefrontal cortex isn't developed till you're 25. And we said, this is going to be a long way to paddle all the way back to the park against this current now. And we said, that river doesn't look that bad on ground level. Standing up at the old West Prestonsburg Bridge, man, it looked awful. But the ground level, that's not too bad. It's not that far across. We picked out a point about a half mile down the road, said we can get there a lot quicker than we could going back upstream. We let go of those branches. The next thing you know, we're out in the middle of the big sandy river in flood. If somebody had been on that bridge looking down, they would say, who in the world are those two idiots in that little boat going across the big sandy river? That was my buddy Freddie and me. You know how the trees stick up just a little bit out of the water when it's in flood? That's all you can see. Well, we avoided those. Then we got into the middle of the river, got all those whirlpools spinning around, and I still remember Freddie saying, row, Haywood, row. And God was looking out for us. He had a plan for me, and he had a plan for Freddie, because we're still here today. And we made it, we beached down there at Black Bottom and got our boat out of the water. 20 seconds. That wasn't 20 seconds of courage. That was 20 seconds of insanity. But we made it through. 20 seconds of courage that can change your life. It took me about 20 seconds to ask Linda out. She came with me tonight. I think she wanted to hang out in the back since she was one of the few ladies here. Oh, she's over on this side now. since she was one of the few ladies here. We'd met about a week before, and we danced the night away, one of those magical nights. I should have known right then she was the one for me, but it takes me a little while to figure things out. But I called her, and I said, Linda, this is Phillip. Would you like to go out on a date? And she said, who? Hey, that'll let the air out of you pretty quick. I said, well, if you don't remember me, she said, oh, I remember you, but the music was loud, and you've got this unusual Eastern Kentucky accent, and I thought you said your name was Bill. And I said, okay. I said, it's Phillip. She said, Phillip, I'd love to go out with you. 20 seconds of courage, and this summer will be 50 years of marriage. Hey, would you guys give her a big hand? Hey, come on. Hey, Linda. Linda, stand up. Come on. There you go. Great. Putting up with me for 50 years ought to be a big reward for her one of these days. Absolutely. Yeah. You know, when Peter got out of the boat and walked on water, it took about 20 seconds for him to make that decision. When David, even though he had his rocks, even though he was ready to fight Goliath, it took him about 20 seconds to say, it's time, and he charged. When Zacchaeus climbed that tree, 20 seconds. And for each one of those guys, when they took that risk, when they stepped out in faith, it changed their lives. That's what we're talking about tonight. 20 seconds that will change your life. Let me ask you this. Is there something that God is wanting you to do, to step out in faith for him right now? Is there a decision you need to make? Is there a tough conversation that you need to have with someone? Is there a crazy risk that you need to take? What river do you need to cross? Hey, you remember the story of the Israelites crossing the Jordan. They've been wandering in the desert, 40 years, and they get to the Jordan River, and God's promised the land, and it's yours. It's time to go across, but the river's in flood. You've heard a little bit about a flooding river already. So the river's in flood, and what are we going to do? How are we going to get across? Well, God told Joshua, well, tell the priest, get the ark, and 8 of you guys step into the flooding river. Sounds easy. But if you were one of those priests, think about it. Am I going to step into that flooding river? You know what it's like. We live on creek banks. You step into that mud, you're just as likely to slip and fall and be carried away in the flood as anything. They had about 20 seconds to decide. And they showed their courage. They showed their faith. They stepped into the water, and God took over. And that's the way God works. He wants us to step in first. He wants us to step in, and then he acts. And he said, now let me show you what I can do. I'll do the big stuff. I'll just stop the water for you. All you had to do was step in. Amazing story. Think about that. Stand up again. Come on. We got to get into this. All right, you ready now? Step in. Okay, good. What are we stepping into? Faith. Come on. Step in. Courage. Step in. Faith. Turn your friend. 20 seconds. Okay, great. You can have a seat. I know you're getting into this now. You kind of like this stepping in kind of thing. I know Pastor Jacob was talking about Nehemiah. Great leader, great vision. One of the greatest people to study in the Bible when it comes to leadership, everything that he did. And I'm sure you've learned tremendously from him. I'm not going to go into that. But he had one decision he had to make. Took him about 20 seconds to say yes or no. And that was when he had to approach the king and ask the question, can I do this? And he was worried about it. His face was troubled. And you may have already talked about this, but the king noticed it. I think God nudged the king a little bit and said, King, ask Nehemiah what's the matter with him. But he said, what's the matter with you, Nehemiah? And right then he had that choice to make. He could play it safe and say, oh, I'm fine, king. Nothing's the matter. Or he could say, I got a problem. My people have a problem, and I need for you to help me. And that's what he did. And the king not only said, okay, but he blessed him. He gave him whatever he needed. He let him go. He let people go. And he gave him all the supplies that he needed, all the resources that he needed to do that job. 20 seconds of courage. In 1 Samuel chapter 14, there is a great story about Jonathan and his dad Saul, King Saul. And at that time, the Philistines were controlling the western border of Israel, and the Israelite army had approached what was called the Michmash Valley. And they were on the eastern border there, and there was a pass in the Michmash Valley. And on the western slope where the Philistines were, there was kind of a high cliff. And so the Philistines were up on top, had the high ground. They had a big garrison there. But on the other side was King Saul and his army. And it says, if you read through this, that King Saul was sitting under a pomegranate tree, eating pomegranates. He wasn't very interested in pursuing the Philistines. He was satisfied with the status quo. But he had a son named Jonathan, and Jonathan was in it to win it. He wanted in the game, and he wanted to get after these guys. Saul, on the other hand, he just wanted to play it safe. He just didn't want to lose. And that's the difference between faith and fear. Faith, if you allow faith to dictate your life, you're going to live cautiously, defensively, and reactively. But if you allow fear to dictate your life, you'll live cautiously. But if you allow faith to dictate your life, you're going to go on offense. You're going to attack. And that's the difference between holding out on God and going all in for God. As we read the rest of the story, we see that Jonathan, at some point with his armor bearer, he speaks up and says, let's go over and check out these Philistines. Let's go to that outpost. Perhaps God will take our side. Perhaps he'll give them into our hand. He says, whatever's possible, God can take care of it. I'm paraphrasing this right now. And the armor bearer, I love the armor bearer because I ask my teams this question a lot. But the armor bearer said, I'm with you. I'm all in. And it doesn't matter. I think I heard someone saying this, pastor may have at the beginning. If you're in business, it doesn't matter if you're in a marriage. It doesn't matter if you're in a sport. And it certainly doesn't matter if you're in a life and death situation. You're not going to be successful unless that person next to you or the people closest to you are all in. They've got to be all in for you to succeed. And this armor bearer was all in with Jonathan. He said, I'm with you. Let's go get him. So they slipped out at night. They didn't ask his dad or anything. Dad probably said, no, you're crazy, Jonathan. You don't need to do that. But they start to cross the valley. And they get about 3/4 of the way. And Jonathan gets like we do. He started having second doubts. You know, he was all fired up when it started. And then he said, maybe we need to inquire of the Lord, he told his armor bearer. Let's ask him a question. We do that, don't we? We start a big project, we take a risk, right? And sometime we wake up in the middle of the night and say, God, are you really with me on this? Well, we're not doubting God. We're doubting ourselves. I think Jonathan was having a couple of self-doubts about that time. He said, so let's ask God, if they come down to us, okay. But if they say, you come up to us at the top of the cliff, that means God's on our side, and we're going to go get him. Well, that was kind of crazy. Think about that. It would be much better if they came down to them and they fought on their ground. No, Jonathan said it just the opposite, the hardest thing to do. They were going to have to climb a 500-foot cliff. Two guys, skin in their knees, cut in their hands, their elbows, muscles cramping up. They're going to be tired. Everything would be against them. But that's what Jonathan asked God to do. So they get closer to the rim, or to the base of the cliff. And as they get there, you have the soldiers at the top, the sentries, and they see them coming. And they said, hey, guys, come on up, and we'll show you what's what. And Jonathan looked at his armor bearer, and I love this. He looked at his armor bearer, and this is me just picturing what really took place. And he said, it's on. And you know what the armor bearer said, don't you? He said, I'm all in. Let's go. And there they went. Those two guys with a Philistine garrison waiting at the top of a cliff. They climb the cliff. They go over it. And on the first onslaught, Jonathan takes out 20 of them. Anybody left writhing on the ground, the armor bearer, he takes care of them. He finishes them off. And then it's as if God steps in and he says, okay, Jonathan, you proved that you're faithful to me. You've proved your courage. You've proved that you're willing to take a risk and believe in me. Now, I'm going to show you I'm all in with you. Look what I can do. And he sent an earthquake. And he sent fear and confusion into the camp of the Philistines. They turned on each other and started fighting each other, killing each other. And Saul heard the ruckus, and they started across the valley to see what was going on. By the time they got there, all they found was a pile of dead bodies and a bunch of Philistines hightailing it down the road. All because of one man. 20 seconds of courage. Stand up. You get an idea now, huh? One step. You get it? All right. One step of faith. One step of courage. Turn to your friend and neighbor. 20 seconds. Okay, great. You can sit down. Yeah. We'll be lining up here in a minute. We're going to be ready to go. Yeah. Okay. Hey, I heard a great story, and I know Pastor Jacob was going to really appreciate this, and I asked him earlier if his wife was going to be here because she will really appreciate this, but I heard this just a few days ago. I've got to share it with you. There was a pastor at a church, a little bigger than this one. They had a balcony, pretty good sized crowd. He was on the stage giving his sermon. His wife was sitting on the second row. And at some point during the message, she felt like God was telling her to go on the stage and do a cartwheel. And she kind of, did one of those things. Is this really God speaking to me? And she kept listening. And after about the fourth time, she said, yes, God is telling me to go do a cartwheel. So she gets out of her seat. She walks across the front of the stage, up the steps, and does a cartwheel while the pastor's preaching. Now, Pastor Jacob, I've got to tell you, this pastor handled this well, just in case your wife ever does this. He didn't say a word. He just kind of looked at her like she was having a moment and went on with his message. She goes off the stage, sits down, puts her head down, totally embarrassed, almost humiliated. He finishes the message. Now, here's the rest of the story. There was a guy who had been coming to church with his wife, and maybe 6 months. He wasn't a believer. He was just doing it to pacify her. They sat in the balcony. On the way in, he mockingly said to God, if you're for real, why don't you have someone do a cartwheel on the stage today? He gave his life to Christ that day, and now is a powerful force in that church. That wouldn't happen unless there was a lady in this case, the pastor's wife, who had 20 seconds of insane courage. I'm going to close with a story, a personal story for me. And I don't know if anybody's heard this or you've been in an audience where I've shared this story or not. It's only a year or two old, so it's relatively new. And I call it Chase the Lion. I've got devoted a full chapter to this in my book, but I'm going to shorten it down a little bit. But it sums up a little bit of the things that we've been talking about tonight, about courage and taking a risk and sometimes going against the odds, doing a few things like that. And when we think of a lion, probably the one thing that comes to our mind about facing one is to turn and run the other way as fast as we can. But it's when you really turn and chase the lion that you're going to get the experiences in life that make it worth living. The more impossible the odds, the more amazing the miracle. Now listen closely. Every miracle begins with one thing: a problem. the problem comes first, and then the miracle. So that means if you have a problem, you're blessed, because now you're a candidate for a miracle. The only person with a problem is a person without a problem. Little problem, little miracle. Big problem, big miracle. Are you a candidate for a miracle? Turn to your friend and neighbor and say, you are a candidate for a miracle. And I know I am. It seems like the older you get, the bigger your problems get. So mine just keep increasing as they go on. But we've got a big God that can certainly perform miracles. There was a guy by the name of Benaiah in the Old Testament, and I'm going to shorten this story. But to sum it up, one day he jumped in a pit with a lion on a snowy day, and he killed a lion. Great story. And if I was a betting man, I wouldn't have bet on Benaiah. How do you calculate the odds of man versus lion in a pit? Did you know a lion can grow up to 500 pounds, run 35 miles per hour, has 5 times the eyesight of a normal human being, can cut and turn on a dime just like these really good athletes, feline features. The battle was in a pit, close confines, dimly lit, plus it was snowing. And that meant the lion was hungry. All the advantages to the lion. And yet Benaiah didn't hesitate. He jumped right into the pit and went after that lion. He's what I call a lion chaser. And lion chasers know one thing. The greater the odds simply sets the stage for even more amazing miracles. In the 1980 Olympics, the United States hockey team went up against the Soviets in the semifinals. Many of you remember that. I watched it in person, and they made a movie about it. They were huge underdogs. They'd scrimmaged the exhibition match, I think they called it, against them about a month before, and they just were trounced. No one was giving them a chance. But on that cold winter night in Lake Placid, New York, the clock was ticking down. The USA was ahead, and the crowd's going crazy. USA, USA, USA. And Al Michaels delivered one of the greatest sports quotes in history when he said, "Do you believe in miracles?" And the United States went on to win the gold. To be a lion chaser, you got to defy the odds. In 1951, Rosa Parks got on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, and she took her seat. A white passenger asked her to move to the back of the bus. She refused. She was arrested, jailed. She lost her job. A citywide boycott ensued. And 2 years later, the laws of our country were changed for the better. All because one young lady had enough courage to face that lion. In 1945, Oskar Schindler began passing a list around of 1,097 names of people he wanted to rescue from Nazi concentration camps. His friend said, "Oskar, you're crazy. They're going to kill you, or they're going to put you in a camp yourself." But he was determined. He died broke without anything to his name. But 50 years later, 6,000 descendants celebrated. You've got to be willing to take a risk to be a lion chaser. What do you think Benaiah felt when he jumped into that pit with the lion, up close and personal? Those big lips of the lion pulled back. He could see those big teeth. He could smell its bloody breath and the roar. Well, I bet he heard the roar in his ears the rest of his life. Yeah, he killed the lion, but not before it scared the heck out of him. I wonder if he had PTSD after that encounter. You got to overcome your fears to be a lion chaser. In 2021, I almost didn't chase the lion. I had a bad case of COVID in January. I was in the hospital for a week. I developed pneumonia. The doctor put me off work for 2 months. I came back part-time, and I had all the symptoms. Man, fatigue, headaches, and I just wasn't thinking right. My mind wasn't working right. And, of course, Linda had no sympathy at all. She said, I couldn't tell any difference. You've always been pretty messed up. Gotta love my wife. But winter turned into spring, and I still wasn't feeling right. I began thinking that I don't know if I can coach this year or not. But I prayed about it. I talked with my confidants about it. And by the middle of May, I was all in, come what may. And yes, we did start the season 0-5. But I had a bunch of lion chasers on that team. Every Monday, after every loss, they would come in with their heads up, eyes open, ready to learn, ready to improve, with a belief that if they could get a little better each day, that by the end of the year, we could do something special. And you know, it's real easy to say, get a little better each day when you're 3-1 or you're 5-0, when the bills are being paid and everything's going good in your life. But when you're 0-5 and you've been knocked flat on your back and everybody's against you, when the bills aren't being paid, you've lost your job, your relationships aren't going well, then you really have to buy into the fact and believe that, yes, if I just keep putting that one foot in front of another, that somewhere down the road, this can pay off. And they believed that if they could get better each day, by the end of the year, we could do something remarkable. And we did. We went from 0-5, and for the first time in the history, to my knowledge, of Kentucky high school football, we went from 0-5 and won the state championship. I went into the locker room after the game, and we celebrated for a long time, but I began talking with my team, and within a couple of minutes, I just broke down in tears. And you guys that's played for me know I get a little emotional sometimes, much more so after wins than losses. But it was as if God said to me, Phillip, you see, all you could see at the beginning were the tough times, the doubts, the fears, the uncertainties. But I could see it all. Now that was a moment. Have you ever had a God wink when God takes something that you just didn't see coming, and when everything comes together, he looks down at you with a big smile on his face and winks at you? Well, I got a God wink that day. And I learned something. I already knew it, but it was driven home more emphatically that if you're going to be a lion chaser, if you're going to be like Jonathan, you got to defy the odds. You've got to have courage. You've got to be willing to take a risk, and you've got to overcome your fears. But more importantly, you've got to put your trust and faith in the one who holds your future and my future in the palm of his hand. The biggest regret at the end of your life will be the lions that you didn't chase. Risks not taken, opportunities not seized, dreams not pursued. And every day you got to make this choice. You can either play it safe or you can jump into that pit. But I firmly believe that one day in the record books of life, the people that will be remembered are going to be those that jumped into the pit with the lion. We've got to stop running from what scares us and start chasing the God-ordained opportunities that lie in front of us. Don't be a lion chaser for a day, a week, a month, or even a year. Be a lion chaser for life. And your rewards, your life will be unbelievable. Chase the lion. Chase your dreams. Step into your faith. The more impossible the odds, the more amazing the miracle. Thank you, and may God bless you.
If it's okay with you, I'd love to do some Q&A with you. Our team will bring a couple chairs out for us.
Oh, that'd be good.
And I'd love to ask you some questions just about your talk tonight, and then if it's okay, maybe ask just a few personal questions, leadership questions, just to help them in tonight. And so I'm just curious, in your life, you talk about going all in and being courageous in your faith. Talk about that moment where you first took that step. When did you decide to go all in for Jesus and believe and follow him?
That's a great question. And actually, I was thinking about that. So I'm glad you asked it, but I didn't want to take too much time talking about it. Some of my guys sitting in here that played back in the 70s are very aware of this situation. But one of our players, Stuart Wright, many of you know of this situation. My first book, Faith, Family, and Football, my first chapter was about this incident. And he was paralyzed in a game in 1976. And I was all gung-ho about coaching. And I had a pretty good idea of the values and things that the game taught. But I don't know if I was all in. I knew about Jesus. My mom and dad raised me right. Didn't mean I did everything right, but they raised me right to where I had that idea of who it was. I had somewhat of a relationship. But after that incident, I had to make a decision. One, I had to overcome the fear of what not only I went through, but our players and our community went through with that injury. And was I going to be able to do that? And I realized over a period of time, it didn't happen overnight, that I could not do that on my own. And I still remember going to my aunt's house. She was a great prayer warrior. Sometime, it was probably 1979, actually. It was a 2 or 3 year process. And just falling on my knees, tears streaming down my cheeks. And I don't remember what I said, but I know what it meant was I had to go all in. I couldn't ride the fence anymore. I couldn't just be kind of part of a Christian. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right, and I had to do it with Jesus. And that's probably when I know for sure that I was all in. And from that point on, I think my coaching, not my philosophy necessarily changed that much, but my direction, my purpose, and my vision became very clear in what I wanted to do with my profession.
I love how you emphasize when you make that decision, that's when your purpose became clear. Jesus said he came to give us life and give it to us more abundantly, and that's awesome. What are some reasons you find in men in particular for not going all in for Jesus? What are barriers you may see that we could help with as a church? Or what would you tell that person if they're maybe here tonight? And
you're asking some tough questions tonight, Pastor. Man, I ought to walk out in the audience and hand you all the mic and say, you want to answer this one, Jeff? Here you go. I'll give it to you. I don't know. I think sometimes men are just, to a certain extent, a little backward. Maybe they say, well, I'll let somebody else do it. We have a tendency to do that. As you said, leadership, everything rises and falls on leadership. I can tell you know a little bit about John Maxwell. And that's so true. But sometimes we just don't take the bull by the horns. It's like we pass it off. Well, let somebody else do it. That's somebody else's responsibility. But I've learned over the years that it's not really anyone else's responsibility. You have a responsibility to yourself first. You've got to be in charge of yourself. Before you can grow as a person, let me rephrase that. Before you can grow someone else, you got to grow yourself. Before you can lead someone else, you got to lead yourself. I share that in some of my talks, actually, that one of my issues when I first started coaching, it wasn't inexperience. I didn't know how to lead me. I had to learn to lead myself. But I think learning to step forward and not be so conscientious of our mistakes and realize that it's through mistakes that we learn and it's okay to fail is a big thing. and not just with guys, but with gals too. But for whatever reason, it's guys sometimes say, well, I'll just do the work. I'll let somebody else be front and center. But I think if we're going to lead our families, if we're going to lead our communities, we have to have Christian men that are willing to step forward and say, I'll do this. I'll do this. I'm all in. And I may make mistakes along the way, but I'll learn as I go, and God will bless you.
That's right. Yeah, I try to encourage men a lot. You know, the goal of Christianity is not to be perfect, but it's to follow the one who is perfect. And I love that you emphasize it's okay to fail. I think it wasn't Maxwell that wrote Failing Forward, and just a great philosophy and leadership lesson for men for sure. Had one other question about your talk, and I hope it makes sense as it's formulating in my mind. So in your life, career, and family, you have a choice. You can either go all in on your faith or you cannot. Following Jesus and going all in is a decision we make to have faith in a relationship with him. But what would you say to the person to stress the importance of, hey, it's not just a one-time decision, but it's an everyday decision?
Yes. Yeah. Let me get this mic back up here. It's kind of what I said almost in closing there is you don't want to chase that line. You don't want to go all in just for a day. And we see people do that a lot. They're fired up for playing a sport. They're fired up for being a good student. They're fired up in their job, but it's only for a little while. And then they fade away. That kind of goes back to the parable of the sower, the different kinds of seeds that you have. And I think that when you go all in, you've got to understand what commitment means, that it's not always going to be easy. I'm going to interject something here. All right. I'm doing a workshop, leadership training next Tuesday, and it's called Do the Impossible, Inside-Out Growth for 21st Century Leaders. If there's anybody in here that would like to attend, I've got just a few seats left. It's about sold out. So it's a half-day kind of thing. But we're talking about this same kind of thing. We're not talking about, I can go through and give you all kinds of leadership skills about communication, commitment, all that kind of stuff. No, we're talking about how you grow from the inside out. And it's kind of a secular meeting, but there's going to be some undertones of spirituality because that's who I am. But you've got to go all in with what you're doing and everything that you can do. And be consistent with that. Be committed with that. And your faith is no different than your family, than your career. And it's to a certain extent, part of it's habitual, but a lot of it's just pure out determination. I'm not, just because something bad happens, I'm not going to give up and say, okay, well, it's not working out. I'll not go back to church in 3 or 4 weeks. That's not the way it works. You can't do that with your family. You can't do that with your job. And your faith is much more important than those.
So I have 3 personal questions for you, if that's okay. I want to respect your time. So you've obviously, is this your 49th year of coaching? Did I have that correct?
49th as a head coach. Next year will be 50.
Wow, that's incredible. So that's a long time. How do you stay motivated and encouraged to press in and press on for that long?
Well, it goes back to purpose for me. And I have to do things to motivate myself. One of the things that I do, and you mentioned John Maxwell, I've been to a couple of John Maxwell conventions. People say, well, what's a football coach doing there? Well, I can tell you, I'm the only one there, so I'm an oddity because that's mainly business people and entrepreneurs. But John always, if he has a 3-day convention type thing, one of his sessions is going to be free, and it's going to be a spiritual session. And during that spiritual session, even though it's a secular meeting, and because it's free and he's already got people kind of in his wheelhouse now, he'll have 500 people come to the altar, even though the stage, I guess, that morning at 7:30 in the morning. So he kind of works through that, and I've always been attracted to him because of his faith. But I've gone to other places too, so I find things to motivate me. I've got a list. There's things I do every year. I'll go to visit a college. I'll go to a clinic. I'll go to some seminar that is not even related to football to help me grow as a person. And when you grow as a person, you've got to grow mentally, physically, and spiritually. It's not just one part. You can't just grow with your family or your job. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in growing in our career that we forget about the other sides. And it's the other sides that are going to make the difference that's really going to take your growth. So I've learned a lot about personal growth and what I have to do. But if I do those things, and if I start doing what I'm doing tonight, if I come out and speak to people, if I have workshops and I start sharing some of the things I've learned, that motivates me to help others. And I've learned this. If you can be a servant leader, if you can help other people, then that takes the focus off of you. And I think it's one of the most highly motivating things a person can do is to help others.
So good. I love how you emphasize if we as men will care for ourselves and get healthy, it bleeds into every other area of life. That's so good. So obviously, in your span of coaching and leadership, I'm sure there have been some discouraging seasons. How have you, and what are practices you would encourage us with to overcome those seasons of discouragement when you faced them? Because they're coming, right? Yeah.
There you go.
That's great. That's great. I love it.
Hey, just put that one foot in front of the other and keep going. One of the unique things about me, and most of you know this, is I personally didn't win a championship for 31 years. And that's a long time. Most people retire in 31 years. But we finally won one. Since then, we've won several. And I sometimes think, one of the odd things was somebody came up to me after our first championship, one of these news stations, said, well, now you got your championship, you're going to retire. And I just kind of looked at him like, hey, man, this is just getting fun now, But some people look at it that way. They say, well, you reach a goal, and that's it. But if you've got a purpose, if you've got a vision that you're making a difference in people's lives, it's not just about you, that enables you to keep going. But through the tough times, yes, you do just have to put one foot in front of the other. And that's true in everything that you do.
That's good. I love how everything you're emphasizing tonight, the drum you keep beating is just the importance and centrality of your faith. I mean, that's what you're always going back to in great seasons and tough seasons. And I think we can learn a lot from that and benefit from that. The last question I have for you tonight is kind of in the same vein of what you were just talking about. So I've heard it said before that the enemy of future success is current success. And so when you think about 8 state championships and those successful moments, how do you keep moving that ball down the field and stay motivated? Hey, this isn't the end, it's just the beginning.
Yeah. Well, very similar to what I just said. I've also heard you talk about the enemy. The enemy of good or the enemy of great is good. You get satisfied. You get comfortable with wherever you are. Everybody's right here. And wherever we are, there's more inside of you. I firmly believe that. Wherever I am today, there's more inside of me. Does that mean another championship? I don't know about that. But I know that if I can improve as a person, that's going to give me a chance to help the people around me improve. And so I still come back that you've got to have your own personal growth going on in all areas of your life. And that'll bleed over, as Pastor said, into the other areas of your life. And there's motivation. I just think you can motivate yourself. You got to look for it. Get on some of these motivational podcasts. Listen to some of these people. I was on one the last 2 days, and I took notes. Hey, I'm learning some stuff. Let me tell you this. I've got one of these computers, and it's got a microphone, and I can put dictate on it, and I can put my phone up to it, and it'll copy down the words, and I can walk off and leave it. And then I come back and read it, because I can't take notes that fast. Oh, it was great. I took something down the other day, and I started reading through. I said, oh, this is great. I'm going to use this. I'm going to use this. And it was from a coach, and one of them was just a business leader, just somebody that I'd run into. But there's all kinds of things you can do to motivate yourself, but you have to be very intentional. You have to be intentional about it. You can't just get up and do the same thing every day. Make a plan. Say, all right, I normally get up at 6. well, I'm going to get up at 5:45 and I'm going to listen to some speaker. It could be spiritual, it could be motivational, it could be leadership, it could be any of those things. Do something a little different. Add a little something to your day to help motivate you. And it's amazing what that'll do for the way you feel about yourself, your energy level, and how you proceed in life.
Thank you.
Got a little excited on that one.
Coach, anything else you would leave us with? Anything else on your heart you'd want to share to the men here tonight?
No, it's what I said at the very beginning is it's really an honor for me to come and share with you. You guys, I know not everybody played in this room, obviously, or played for me anyway, but I've had such great relationships with you, and I was being very honest when I said Linda and I reminisced greatly. We do a lot when we drive through, coming from here to go to Lexington, and we're always bringing up former players, students, things that happened over the years in this community, and it's just been a great honor for me to be here, and I thank you for having me.
Can we thank Coach for being here again tonight? Coach, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you be willing to pray for the men who were here?
I'd be glad to. Okay. Yeah, all right, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening with praise and thanksgiving. We hope and pray that everything that has been done here tonight, everything said, every heart has been for your honor, for your glory, and we just pray that your blessings be upon each person here, that we can grow in your spirit, in your love, in your faith, in your courage, and that each one of us will be more willing to take that step, to take that next step of faith, the next step of courage, 20 seconds of courage. And we thank you and praise you for who you are, what you've done for us, and we ask all this in Jesus' name.